Joe Escobedo here, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Marketing Asia podcast. Joining me today is my co-host for today, Shub's. Our special guest is Chetan, who is the CMO Asia Pacific at IBM. Chetan, now, this is a topic I think on a lot of B2B marketers' mind is CX, customer experience transformation. So let's just dive right into it. Maybe you could share a specific example of maybe a good example of customer experience.
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. If you go ask, I think most of the senior leaders, I think 70 to 80% of them, I think will tell you CX, I think is top of mind, right? Because there's a lot of shifting behavior in terms of consumer demand, and there's a lot of need for personalized experiences still in 2022 and at 2023. As we enter 23, there is still a lot of evolution happening in this space. And what happened with the pandemic, I think, has only accelerated digital as we speak. And this obviously has created the need to create very immersive, personalized online or offline experiences that actually intersect, right? Because there's no one way, right? And look, to me, I think there are quite a few examples that obviously come to mind when you look at it from a pure CX perspective. But one of the pieces that I can talk about is a little bit inside out, and then we'll talk about maybe outside in kind of an experience, right? So we can look at it both, because CX is stakeholder-centric, client-centric, depending on how we look at it. Now, if you look at many of the insurance companies, right? One of the most interesting things or challenging things for them is to obviously do a lot of claims, right? Claims obviously is a big area for them. And when you have to process claims, it requires a lot of information to be looked at in unison. And how you process the claims, how fast you process the claims, with how much confidence you process the claims has a very direct impact on end customer experiences, because folks are obviously waiting for some of these things to clear. How long does it take? How accurate is it? The disputes going back and forth, costs, and so on. So one of the pieces of work that I think that we did was around looking at multiple sources of information, be it structured, be it unstructured, which could include in some cases video, which could include in some cases images. How do you bring all of this together, right? To have a little bit more confidence in terms of claims processing, claims management, so that you can actually impact end customers with faster, as I said, more accurate, more quicker processing time, while also helping the stakeholders, which happen to be folks who are actually processing this claim, to do this with a lot more confidence. So this is almost a dual impact, if you will, because you're augmenting decision making in many ways, because you're almost using AI as a means to, in some ways, claim assessment, right? The damage assessment and things like that. And you're taking away a lot of the potential things that will creep into this by giving them that kind of an information saying, I'm so much confident, this is what I think, and things like that. By integrating various sources of data, and for the end customer, it's faster settlement times. And I think there's nothing better than obviously getting some of the claims and things like that settle faster. Now, what this obviously takes is a lot of things that starts, I think, with empathy, right? If you look at any enterprise design thinking methodology, I think it starts with looking at things like empathy maps, being able to understand multiple dimensions, right? How are the clients feeling, thinking, hearing, which in this case happens to be the employees or the stakeholders, but also looking at it from the client's lens, because they have a very different posture on how they look at claims, for example, right, for insurance claims. So putting all of these things together, doing some kind of a phased roadmap, doing prioritization in terms of impact, ROI, in terms of time to market, and then putting this together, obviously, in a minimum viable product, initially, like an MVP, and then essentially then scaling this out. But the key, I think, remains KPIs, right? Because you set your KPIs early, which need to be tangible, impactful, client-centric, which can actually give you that kind of lift. So this would be one example that I can think of, Joe, that kind of looks at both inside and in some way outside.
I love that example because when you think about AI, we're thinking about something sexy and futuristic, but to your point, claims, not the sexiest thing, but they're really important. I was on the user side a couple months ago. I had to submit some claims, and the process was not, like you said, not as smooth as I would like to be. A lot of back and forth, a lot of waiting time. And as a user, if you're waiting for that and it's like a large sum, then you're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stress for the user. And obviously there's a lot more work for the person managing that. So if there is some way on the back end to manage that process, it makes, to your point, internally people happier and externally people are happier. So I love that example.
Yeah. And I think if you also look at, to your point, right, Joe, I think some of these are real enterprise applications, right? Because these are designed obviously to help organizations, like you said, deliver the best of CX and help end user impact. But there is also obviously pieces of work where you look at how do you create potentially a very immersive and personalized buying experience, right? Which almost, if you're, for example, buying a watch as an example, how do you create some kind of a 360-degree view so that each customer can actually personalize their own shopping experiences, right? And this gets into the coolness factor or territory, as you will, because then your application of AI, your application of platforms and technology and things like that are now more focused on really impacting end user experiences in terms of giving them that immersive feel, almost as if you're really there looking at this piece of equipment that you're trying to buy, which obviously is really cool and something that you want on your hand. But how do you create that kind of a 360-degree view for these clients, the experience to actually go in? Now, to your point, to get on slightly to the more industrial side in some ways again, is if you're a bank and if you're actually trying to create a truly omni-channel experience for your clients who are actually coming in to transact with you, this also needs a lot of work to be done in the back end and technology, right? So we talk about AI, we've talked about some of these analytics and data, but you also have APIs, for example, right? The interfaces that you need to build, because you got to be able to connect what you have within the organization securely with partners, with channels. And that's how you can obviously invoke new business models. So when you invoke new business models, you can then translate that to CX through these immersive experiences, which could be visualizing something, being able to interact with something, being able to really feel like you're actually there. But to do that at the back end, the key then becomes how do you connect pieces? How do you do this securely? Because you want your data to be safe and protected and so on. So it has, I think, multiple dimensions, right? When you start looking at it in terms of how these things play out and how they come about and things like that. So I see it as a true intersection, right? Of what we think of as back-end infrastructure all the way up to what you want your clients to see, which is the best possible CX. So you can come back and they can obviously transact with you. You create customer delight at the end of the day. All of this needs to contribute to customer delight, right? That's the key, with PS being one of the metrics.
Yes, you mentioned AI and personalization. I want to get to that, but I want to also make sure Shubs has a chance to ask any questions. Shubs.
Yeah, good quick one here since you mentioned the backend process. Just want to know from experience, what sort of role do you think an IT head would have in terms of connecting that back office to the front office so that we get the 360 view?
Yeah, I think it's a very important topic, Shub. So I think if you look at it, we've talked about this notion of two-speed. It almost is basically two gears, right? So the one gear is basically working at very high speed, supporting rapid prototyping, MVP development. You're looking at cycles, which in some cases are weeks, right? We were talking about innovation cycles of years, then we came to months, and now it's almost like weeks. And there's another speed, which basically is the actual core infrastructure when you come to a bank or an insurance organization, which is very secure, very robust, can handle millions and millions of transactions. Now, first of all, the role that IT plays here, I think, is super critical because you got to be able to connect all of these systems together, and you got to be able to bring agility to CX because you want to try things out, you want to understand, you got to do A/B testing, take feedback, go back, and then you got to bring back stuff so that you're ready for what you want your clients to see. Now, if you look at the challenges that the IT or the technology team solves here, right? One is data, because the data is, first of all, in disparate locations in many organizations. And you're also looking at external data, potentially also being connected. So there's a bit of a work that needs to be done in connecting what we call as the systems of record. That is a huge, I think, role, right? Second one, I think, is the deployments today. Some of it is on public cloud. Some of it is on private cloud or on-prem. Some of it could be on the edge, depending on device interactions and things like that. So somebody needs to be able to have this seamless management of how you want to deploy this truly enterprise scale. That's the second piece I think there's a big. So that means the role comes down to modernization of legacy systems. So it's connecting systems of record for analytics, modernizing systems so that you can actually get ready for fast innovation cycles, APIs, being able to connect inside and outside the organization so you can truly enable business models. And I think the fourth one will be security. Like, how can you keep everything secure? While it's amazing to go out and experience all of these things, you don't want your data to be secure in rest, in motion, in transit, all of that. I think that's a big role that I think a technology has to play. I would look at it as four dimensions, I think, should, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and Chetan, you mentioned earlier about AI and personalization. Now, AI is another one of those super hot topics right now, and a lot of open source technology already exists, like DALL-E and Lenda, to already allow users to personalize things like their photos and avatars, things like that. How do you see this playing in terms of the corporate world? How do you see enterprise marketing leverage some of these existing technologies, or maybe creating some technologies in itself to, like you said, create personalization for consumers?
Yeah, I think the key, at the end of the day, I think, Joe, comes down to the outcome, right? And I think there are many means to the end outcome. And I think we were talking in the beginning, I think the application of technology needs to be fully lined up with the KPIs that as an organization that you're going towards, in this case, CX. Now, to achieve that outcome, you have multiple means, right? Obviously, you can invest in a particular platform, which you think is the base foundational platform for delivering these experiences to their end clients. But the same platform needs to be flexible to be able to incorporate a variety of open technologies and solutions and tools like that, so that you can actually build a solution that's truly value added. And I think the approach now is to say, look, I am looking at a particular platform which gives me the highest level of security, which obviously plays directly into how my brand is perceived, because I want to make sure that I'm protecting my clients. That's the most important thing for me, right? As you come into an organization and they're not vulnerable, once I start with that, then I start looking at how do I leverage the ecosystem, if you will, like to your point, right? There are technologies out there, some open source, some proprietary. The question is, how do you harmonize all of these technologies to actually deliver the end user impact? And to do that, again, you need a platform, you need a technology that's very modular, that can easily integrate a variety of pieces and can be extendable in terms of security considerations, right? So when you do that, then you almost look at this as a Lego block in some ways, because you're now taking pieces that might be disparate in many ways, but you are now assembling them towards an end outcome, right? That becomes one piece of the puzzle. Now, the other piece here is the methods that you apply to actually deliver the outcome on the platform, which is where, like we were talking, things like design thinking and how do you develop these MVPs? How do you manage your product backlog? Some people using epics and things like that. And how do you build this whole iterative way of platform and product development so that you're taking feedback from the field and you're agile enough both on the platform front, because you're looking at variety of pieces coming together, but also in terms of methods, right? But the key for all of this, I think, eventually becomes culture and an effective strategy within the organization so that you are ready for an approach like this. Because you're now looking at how do you differentiate the brand, how do you deliver the best of CX while having the best of technologies and the best of methodologies, but you also need the skills. You also need to understand how the KPIs are evolving, because sometimes the KPIs evolve. A very clear platform strategy, change management plan, all of these things become the softer element of this. So it becomes platform, it becomes culture and some of those nuances, and then it becomes the methods that you use to actually deliver these. So within that, again, I think it's three pillars coming together to actually deliver that CX. And I think for us, the way we've gone to market is essentially like this, right? Because we're trying to work with the ecosystem to bring on partners, to collaborate, but the end outcome is always what the clients want, which I think, as you said, is a truly differentiated CX. That's pretty much how you would look at this, right? And I close this out, right? I think there are a few things, right? So one, I think, is having a very clear strategy and roadmap upfront that kind of is laid out. Humanness pretty much in all the experience design that you do, whether it's for customers or your clients or employees, partners, that emotional connect needs to exist in design. Leveraging technologies like AI, like you said, Joe, like how do you kind of get some level of personalization going into it? Having the right kind of readiness within the organization in terms of talent, both soft skills and technical skills, and be ready for a culture of perpetual change, transformation, because we are always changing. And I think it's very important that everything that we do evolves to meet those growing expectations of our clients. That's how I would look at it. I think, Joe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense. And I think a lot of organizations forget about the customer side of the customer experience. Going back to your point about doing the customer empathy mapping, we were having this conversation recently with one of my colleagues, is And a lot of people want to jump on the new fad, whether it's metaverse or AI, or whatever it is that they think is a new emerging technology. But to your point, it doesn't align with the customer needs and it doesn't align with the business KPIs and strategies.
Exactly.
I know as marketers, we chase the new shining bell, but I think this is a reality check for many of the CXOs listening to this is to go back to the fundamentals, go back to your customer empathy mapping, go back to the strategy and see if it actually aligns with the new tactics and new technologies you're implementing.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I think, to your point, the technology is as good as the application of it to solve a particular pain point. And I think if you forget that, and then if you start, as you rightly said, the shiny objects, then it becomes about the shiny objects and less about what the shiny objects can actually do for the end outcome or the end goal. Absolutely, Joe. Fully agree. And I think that's where starting with KPIs, having that long-term vision roadmap, breaking it into chunks becomes very important. And I think culture plays a key role, empowering, continuous learning, doing MVP, and learning from some of the things that don't work and putting them back in. These things, I think, become very important. And that's when I think the best of CX comes in. Could be both on the employee side, where, like I said, we are equipping tools, we are equipping that information, or on the client side, where you actually are really impacting their lives very positively with good CX. And I think the other piece that a lot of us obviously now are very conscious about and work towards is, I think, making all of this sustainable, right? Because everything that you do has to be sustainable in terms of outcomes and in terms of what we're doing for everything around us, right? Which means being very deliberate about the technology choices that we do, focusing a lot on resource usage so that you can obviously focus on lesser space that you're using in a data center, managing your resource better so that you can actually reduce power consumption, having a very clear understanding of where some of these things are dissipating within the organization, right? So that you can take action. When that happens, that again translates to CX because you're now looking at it from a triple bottom line perspective. So that's the other piece I think that's coming more and more, I think, to the forefront when we just talk about CX, because everyone cares about this. And I think it's an important topic. And it's only right that you start this from the get-go, I think, ground up when you're building these systems from scratch, I would say, Joe.
Yeah, you talked a lot about KPIs, and I definitely want to get to that. But once again, I want to hand it over to Shub to see if you have any questions off of what we just discussed. Oops, you're on mute, my friend.
I'm so sorry. I was just going to ask, looking at, there are fellow B2B marketers out there who are going through this change where there's some reduction in cost when it comes to spending in advertising. During this tough time, what would be your advice to marketers that how they can put priorities in things? So just curious of that.
No, I think it's a very good question, Shubh. I think for me, I think make everything count, right? That's basically what I think my mantra is. Make everything you do count. I think everything we do as marketers, I think impacts some stage of the funnel. If you look at it from an inside-out point of view, at some stage of the funnel, whether you're working on awareness, whether you're working on branding, whether you're working on progression, everything affects some stage of the funnel. I think the key is to make it count. I think sometimes the mantra should be do more with less or do same with less, depending on where you are in your organizational journey. And I think that comes with a lot of outcome focus, being more deliberate about how you segment, how you target, whom you're actually talking to as a marketer, be very clear about it. And one of the pieces I think where it's really helpful for marketers, I think, is to go out a lot more in the field and be with clients. It happens, not that it doesn't happen, but I think getting more out there, talking to people, talking to clients, looking at it, I think to Joe's point goes back to that empathy part because your end needs are changing every day. Right? It's changing. While we have a lot of research and things like that are available, on the ground, things are changing. It's very important. So if you connect all of these things and be very deliberate about what you do, outcome focus, do, same or more with less, and prioritizing. I think this is the time where you have to be very ruthless. I think if that's the right word about prioritizing and also being able to say no to things that just don't make sense. There are so many things that I think you can do away with and say, hey, I'm not going to do this, but instead of this, I'm just going to do this really well. I think that's the other piece I would focus on, right? So get out in the field, talk more to clients and partners, focus on doing more with less, prioritize really hard, and get really outcome focused and skilling. I think continuously skill your teams. I think that's one thing we all do. Obviously, so many things to learn. Just keep reading books, keep looking at things out there, and you pick up something or the other, which will be like, hey, maybe I can do this and this will help me. That's how I kind of look at it, right? All of these are soft skills to a large extent. I think if you apply some of these things effectively, I think you can through this period effectively, I feel, Shubs.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So going on to the point of doing more with less, I'm curious, how does this impact your KPIs? Because if you look at the Disney situation currently. One of the criticisms of the previous CEO is that he focused too much on the short-term returns, whereas Bob Iger, the one who came back, focused on the long-term strategy, long-term vision, and that's why perhaps he's more successful. So what are your thoughts, particularly now when a lot of companies are trying to do more or less in a quicker time to deal with the economic downturn?
Yeah.
How does KPI impact that?
Yeah, I think I will go back to the analogy of the two-speed IT, right? So I somehow believe that I think it's out there, right? I mean, something like almost doing a two-speed marketing. Like you have to be very conscious about what you're doing, for example, 1 quarter out, but also be very conscious about what you're doing 2, 3, 4 quarters out. Some of it, like to Shub's, to your point, right? For example, if you're doing branding initiatives, if you're doing something on the awareness piece like that, it takes time to change the image, perceptions, whatever that is organizations are trying to do. And those require consistency over a period of time. Whereas certain things, for example, say demand generation, you're trying to generate obviously your MQLs and SQLs for the sales team. That obviously, to me, is a lot more short term. And there, the focus is a lot more on conversions, a lot more on operational discipline, rhythm, rigor, and things like that, which I think is the first speed. And the second speed is almost where you're trying to obviously go out and broadly shape how you want some of the future things to look like emerging trends. How do they play with macro factors that are happening outside? And how can this, for example, this technology, like you said, Joe, the shiny object as an example, play a role in actually helping organizations, clients, partners navigate through some of these things 2 or 3 quarters out from now. So that's pretty much how I look at it. And I think there's a fine balance. I think each leader has their own style in terms of how they operate. But there's a very clear balance on how you want to do, how you want to allocate your resources, your investments. And I think going back to the more or less part, maybe with the same investment, if you convert a little bit better, you actually get a little bit more outcomes. Like 1% conversion sometimes on the responses that you get in an organization, I think it translates into a lot of incremental revenue if you look at it. So these are the pieces I think that become very important when resources are not as much, and you focus and you start focusing on some of these small, simpler narratives. KPIs, I think to a large extent don't shift in many ways. You're still focusing on meeting some of the metrics that you have in the short term, but the long-term ones are what I think become more, because how are you shaping what you're doing 3, 4 quarters from now with no control, because there's not a lot of visibility in terms of how this will land eventually. But if you have that North Star in mind, I think it'll help shift from quarter to quarter thinking to a long-term horizon thinking. Then your plan becomes rolling plans. They're no longer limited to 1 quarter plans. They actually are year-long rolling plans that you can keep moving towards, reflect, move, right? And then doing less helps you reflect more. Otherwise, teams are so busy doing things all the time, they hardly have time to reflect on what's happened. This will give you that thing as well, which I think should also give you a lift as an organization. Risky choices, you got to make them, right? Because when resources are not as high, you got to make those decisions and pick what's best for you as an organization.
Absolutely. I was just having this conversation about a half an hour ago with one of my clients. We were talking about creating tons of content. And I asked them, okay, how much of this are you recycling, reusing, and optimizing in terms of conversions? They're like, nothing at the moment. I was like, okay, we need to take a break and look at how we do that.
Point.
Once again, things that should be done. I think it's a good reminder for many of the folks listening to this. So many practical points. You got me thinking about how I'm going to apply some of these things, especially the 2-speed analogy. I really like that. But one question we always ask ourselves to wrap things up is, if you could ask 100 of your peers one question, what would it be?
I think the one question that I would ask any of the peers here is, what's the biggest thing that keeps you awake at night or whatever? As a marketer, what is the one thing now, especially as you enter 2023, what is the one thing that keeps you awake at night? Is it the macro factors? Is it data? What is it? That's the one question that I would ask. I would be very curious and interesting to know what everybody has as their top burning issue, especially the B2B marketers in the region.
All right. I will flip that over and I will ask some of our upcoming guests. But can I flip it back to you real quick and get your thoughts on what's one thing that maybe keeps you up at night? Sorry to throw it back to you. I think it's a great question to ask.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say 2 or 3 things. One, I think for me is culture. I think how do you continue to build positive culture? I think it's a very dear topic for me. That's one thing. Like how do you build on what you already have and continue to drive culture while you drive change, like good culture while you drive change. The second one is how do you grow? Like how, as marketing, what more can you do to be a growth driver, I think, within the organization? That's something that I think always keeps me going. And third one is synergy, Joe. Like we have so many pieces like account-based marketing, you got communication, so many things. how do you get synergistic? What more can you do to build more and more synergies? I would say these are the three things that I think are on top of my mind for 23, I would say.
Beautifully put. I think we'll have to use that as ideas for our upcoming episodes. So thank you, Chetan. It was so much. I really appreciate you sharing our insights. It's been very insightful and a lot of key insights in there.
Great. Thank you for having me, Joe. Thank you, Shubs. It was wonderful. Hope to catch up with both of you in person sometime. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And guys, for everyone watching, listening to today's episode, you have to share it with your colleagues, your bosses. So many practical tips and takeaways in here. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.